Hi, Mr. Traeger here. Today we're going to be talking about the power of assets. We're going to be looking at the 40 developmental assets, what they are, and what they do in our lives, and how we can use those. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that I want to talk about is what are assets? What does this mean? Well, the definition of assets, if you look up in the dictionary, is going to say something along the lines of property that someone owes or valuables that someone has, important objects that people possess. How we're going to look at assets is these are traits. They're important traits that we need to possess rather than physical, tangible objects. These are going to be traits that we need to acquire in order to help us be more successful, be put in a better position to achieve those dreams and goals that we have for ourselves. So there's a organization called the Search Institute, and the Search Institute has put together a lot of research, and I want to say over 30 years of research that they put into investing in young people's lives. What do people need in order to be successful? And what they've put together is they found a common-based list of 40 assets that they feel are important for young people. And what they have said about the 40 assets is that there are 40 common-sense, positive experiences and qualities that help influence choices that young people make and help them become caring, responsible, successful adults. And what they've done is put together a list of 40 different assets that we need to possess throughout our lifetime to help us achieve those goals, to help us improve our quality of life.
Asset number 1, I get lots of family support.
Asset number 10, I feel safe at home.
Asset number 39, I have a strong sense of purpose in life.
Asset number 14, I have a lot of adult role models. Asset number 25, I like to read books for fun.
Asset number 17, I spend a lot of time doing creative activities.
Asset number 34,
we're comfortable with people from different backgrounds.
Asset number 28, I have integrity and I stand up for my beliefs.
Asset number 35, I can resist pressure from bad influences.
So we're going to take a look at those, that list, which is right here, and we'll be getting one of these in class or one similar to it, and I'm going to be looking at it a little bit more closely. But for the sake of our vodcast, I'm just going to kind of summarize what these assets are. If you'll notice, first of all, the assets are basically divided into two categories. Basically, you have the first 20, and then you have the second 20. The first 20 are listed as the external assets. And I'll zoom in here on the external assets. And what we have here is these are different assets, and they're categorized into 4 basic groups. So we have the support group, we have empowerment, we have boundaries and expectations, and we have constructive use of time. And so what we have in here is, like, for example, asset number 1, family support. Family life provides high levels of love and support. We look at asset number 4, a caring neighborhood. A person experiences a caring neighborhood. And so all of these assets, the first 6, are going to be related to teenagers getting support from the community around them. Empowerment, things like youth as resources. Young people are given useful roles in the community. Asset number 10, a person feels safe at home, school, and in the neighborhood. And so this has to do with the sense of empowerment and courage. Boundaries and expectations. Asset 12, school boundaries. The school provides clear rules and consequences. Asset 14, adult role models. Parents and other adults model positive, responsible behavior. Then we have constructive use of time. Creative activities. A young person spends 3 or more hours per week in lessons or practice in music, theater, or other arts. This could probably also include sports programs as well. But these are things that are provided for young people to be involved in. We look here, youth programs. They spend 3 or more hours a week in some kind of a sport, a club, or an organization in their school or in their community. So this has to do with what kinds of activities, what kinds of things does the community provide for students to be involved in. Now, one thing that we'll notice if we were to go through all 20 of these is that teenagers don't have a whole lot of control over these assets, the external assets. They're outside of themselves. For example, if we say parent involved in schooling, asset number 6, parents are actively involved in helping the young person succeed in school. Now, you as a teenager, you don't really have the ability to make your parents be involved in your schooling. That's really got to be up to them. Asset number 7, community values youth. This is something that young people don't have a whole lot of control over. Does the community value youth in their community, or don't they? As teenagers, we don't really have a lot of control over that. Youth programs, creative activities, do communities offer those kinds of things? And that's really what these assets are asking in the external, is what kind of environment is the young person basically living in? All right. So as we scroll down, we see these assets called internal assets. I'm going to make that a little bit bigger. We see these internal assets, and the groups here are commitment to learning, positive values, social competencies, and positive identity. And so we're going to see a little bit different assets in each set of these internal assets. For example, commitment to learning. 21, achievement and motivation. A young person is motivated to do well in school. Asset number 24, a young person cares about his or her school. We go to positive values. Integrity. A young person acts on their convictions and stands up for his or her beliefs. Asset number 29, responsibility. The young person accepts and takes personal responsibility. Moving down into the social competencies, for example, interpersonal competence. A young person has empathy, sensitivity, and friendship skills. Are able to function socially within groups. Resistance skills, asset number 35. A young person can resist negative peer pressure in dangerous situations. So the social competencies have to do with things that we do within social groups. And then lastly, positive identity. This is going to be things like asset 37, personal power. A young person feels that he or she has control over things that happen to them. Asset number 39, a sense of purpose. The young person reports that my life does have purpose. Now, the difference between the internal assets that we saw here, the second 20, versus the external assets, the first 20, is that teenagers have 100% control over these 20 assets, whereas we saw in the first list, most of that had to do with the external environment, which is why they're called external assets. You don't have a lot of control over them. It's kind of up to the environment that we're living in or that we're in at the time. Internal assets, however, it doesn't really matter what your external situation is. You can control these internal assets, such as homework, such as honesty, such as peaceful conflict resolution, those kinds of things. You can control all those kinds of things, which is where the word internal comes from. These assets are controlled internally by me. And so what the Research Institute has identified in their research is that we need to be building these assets in our lives. And again, there are some people that need to help build these assets into our lives, like parents, like youth workers, like teachers, coaches, people like that. But then there's also a set of assets that have to be achieved through our own doing. So it's not all based on somebody else. It's not necessarily all based on me. However, I do have control over some of these. So let's take a look what they found in their research. Now, what the Research Institute did was they took 200,000 surveys over the 6th and 12th graders that they surveyed, and this was across the country. And they basically were looking for some trends. Okay, so basically in leadership areas, what they were looking for was how many students were in some kind of leadership role, student council, team captains, president of clubs, things like that. Maintaining good health. Their definition of maintaining good health would be that the students take an active role in keeping themselves healthy. They're conscious about what they eat. They try to exercise. They try to get 8 hours of sleep a night. They choose not to smoke, those kinds of things. Succeeding in school, the definition there was that students get mostly A's on the report card. So that's going to be important to understand. That's what success in school is. That's how they define it, is they mostly get A's. And then values diversity, where students feel that people from different cultures and from different backgrounds are important. They have value. They have a solid role to play in society. And so those are the first four areas we're going to look at. Now, if you look over here on the side, we have a red square, and that's going to represent students who have anywhere from 0 to 10 assets. The yellow will represent 11 to 20 assets. The blue will represent 21 to 30. And then the green will represent 31 to 40 assets. And so what we're going to take a look at is how many kids had, how many assets that were in leadership roles. So let's take a look at that. So the first column that we look at here, 50% of students who were in a leadership position had 10 or fewer assets, whereas 85% of students who were in leadership roles had 31 assets or more. And then everything followed, kind of ensued in the middle. Maintaining good health. Only 26% of kids who had less than 10 assets cared about their health, whereas almost 90% of kids who cared about their health had 31 or more assets. Succeeding in school, now remember this was defined as getting mostly A's in school. 47% of students who had 31 or more assets were getting almost all A's in school. Only 8% of students who had 10 or fewer assets were getting straight A's in school. And this comes into play a lot of times where some people say, oh, well, not everybody who gets good grades is perfect and all that stuff. And that's true. But if you don't have a lot of assets and you're getting A's in school, that's pretty rare. It's more of an exception than a rule based on their research. And then valuing diversity, we're going to see the same trend. Only 36% of people who feel that people from different cultures are important and have value, whereas 88% of students who had 31 or more assets value diversity. So we see a very clear picture that people who are leaders, take an active role in their health, succeed in school, and value other cultures tend to have more assets than those who really aren't in those types of roles. Now, let's take a look at another set of questions, and that's problem alcohol use, violence, drug use, and sexual activity. Now, I'm guessing you can probably figure out what's going to happen to this graph. So let's take a look at problem alcohol use. We see it flip-flopped. 50% of kids who have problems with alcohol also have 10 or fewer assets, whereas only 3% of kids who are struggling with alcohol use have 31 or more assets. Violent activity. 61% of kids who have 10 or fewer assets are consistently involved in some kind of violent activity, whereas only 7% of students who have 31 or more assets. Drug use. Again, we see the same trend. 39% have less than 10. Actually, this is less than 1% of kids who have 31 or more assets are involved in drugs. And sexual activity, 32% have 10 or fewer assets, and only 3% of kids who are sexually active have 31 assets or more. And again, we see the same trend in the middle, that it gradually, the more assets we have, the less likely we are to engage in these types of things. And that's a big thing a big point to get across and that's what they're finding with their research, is that students who have more assets tend to make better decisions. They tend to have more things going for them. They have a lot more to lose, and so they're less likely to engage in things like alcohol or drugs or unmarried sex, that kind of stuff. Whereas kids who don't have a lot of assets, they don't feel like they have a lot going for them, are much more likely to get involved in reckless or what they would consider high-risk behavior. And so these are some pretty profound studies that they've done in terms of identifying predictive behavior for these types of behaviors. So the conclusion of what the research is, really simple, is that the more assets that you possess, the less likely you are to make high-risk decisions. This is one of those areas where we don't want balance. We want to get as many assets as we can. Even having, if I go back to our graph here, even if I can control all of our internal assets, remember we talked about those internal assets we control, that still puts me at the 21 to 30 assets, and that still puts me at a lower risk of being engaged in these types of behaviors. So we have a lot more control over things in our lives than we don't have control over, to be honest. So the fewer assets that we have, the more likely we are to make high-risk decisions. It basically breaks down to the fewer assets we have, the more likely we are to do dumb things. And that's really what it boils down to. And so when we look at someone building assets, healthy, successful people work at building, maintaining assets. They look at that list and say, yeah, I need to have some more of that stuff, or here's where I'm deficient. Maybe I need to get more involved in these kinds of things. But people who think that all this kind of stuff is stupid, it doesn't make any sense, those are the people who typically aren't building assets, and they also typically are probably engaging in some of those high-risk behaviors, and they don't want to admit that assets or building assets is a way that they can start to change the situation that they're living in. I mean, and that begins with the internal. Their external assets may be really in miserable shape, but in actuality, they have a lot more control over changing how they act or how they are in the situation than they do just changing the situation. So the point being here with the developmental assets, the more we possess, the more likely we are to make good choices. The fewer assets we have, the more likely we are to make dumb decisions. And so the goal here is for us to start looking at these assets, looking at areas where we need some work and improvement, and working to build more of those assets in our life. We're going to take a look at a story here of a guy by the name of Kyle. I want you to pay attention to how assets played a role in his life and what he's doing with assets now.
If I look outside my family, I don't really have anyone in particular that I can say was a great role model for me when I was in junior high. Some of the teachers were actually quite detrimental to me.
I didn't get homework from Kyle.
I actually had a teacher tell me once, Dubé, you're going nowhere. You're going to be a loser. That's it.
It's important for young people to have the support of other adults, not just their parents. When Kyle Dubé entered junior high in St. Albert, he lacked that support, and it soon started to show.
My self-esteem started to go down, so what I decided to do to fit in was try to be that funny guy.
What's up, buddy?
Try to be the guy who will make everybody laugh at other people's expenses. So I was so down on myself that I was going to make you feel bad before you could make me feel bad. So I started to bully some people.
Such a jerk, Kyle!
I didn't like who I was as a person, and I was suicidal.
When a young person he grew up with committed suicide, Kyle saw how devastating it was on that person's family and friends. He started thinking about how his actions had affected others. Shortly after, thanks to the efforts of his mother, Kyle was introduced to someone who would have a deep impact on his life.
I did end up in grade 12 having a good guy come into my life, a local youth pastor here in St. Albert.
Kyle, there's someone at the door for you.
So I'm sitting in social class, and all of a sudden he's knocking on the door. And I'm thinking, what's going on? Like, this guy shouldn't be here.
My name's Matt. I'm from the church. Your mom called me. She wanted to know if we could hang out.
He's like, you know what? Instead of going out for a pop or whatever, like, well, let's just go to the cafeteria. And I was dying inside because I'm in grade 12. I'm, thinking, I do not want people to know I'm sitting beside some religious pastor guy, right? Looking back, he was probably laughing quite hard at it, knowing that I was squirming.
Is it all right if we hang out again sometime, though? Yeah, sure. Okay, sounds good.
We clicked, and he really started to just put some assets into my life, started to encourage me. He accepted me for who I really was, not this guy that I was trying to be all the time. That started to really change my outlook, and that started to change the way that not only the way that I saw myself, probably more importantly the way I saw other people as well.
Kyle experienced another life-changing moment when he had a chance encounter with a homeless man.
So I ended up actually at a local convenience store, and this fellow was sitting outside, who most of the community knows because he's been around for a long time, and he's just kind of part of the community.
Excuse me.
Yeah?
Can you spare some change?
I can't spare any change, but I could buy you some food.
Okay.
He asked me for some money, and I said, well, you know what? I'm not going to give you money. How about I give you something to eat? You want a drink? Do you like pizza pops? And he said, sure. So I went in and I got that, bought myself that as well, and I don't even know why I did it, but I did it, and I sat down. Probably spent an hour to 2 hours. I learned that we weren't so different. I learned that he had a lot of opportunity in his life, that he just chose not to go down some certain roads.
It's been tough sometimes. You don't know where your next meal coming from.
He's a human being. He struggled with self-esteem, but yet he had things in his life that he was passionate about and that he cared about.
Well, I gotta get going. I was supposed to meet my mom.
He encouraged me that day. You know, he told me that I can do anything I want if I just put my mind to it. So I'm 18 years old, and I have a homeless guy building assets into my life.
Upset the fruit basket.
That moment helped Kyle realize his passion in life, helping others. Today, he works with youth at risk, teenagers who've had a tough life. He's there to help them improve their self-esteem and build hope for tomorrow. What words of advice does this father of three have for adults who want to make a difference in the lives of young people?
It's all about relationship building. Rules minus a relationship equals rebellion. Rules plus a relationship equals respect. Go. We're going to have rules on young people. You have to have a relationship with them, or they will rebel. But a lot of young people I know, they like just sitting in front of a computer screen or a TV and playing video games. Well, if that's their thing, sit beside them and learn how to do it. Invest time into what they want to invest time into. That's how you make connections with young people. Meet them where they're at.
So, the object here is for us to gain assets just like Kyle. He started to notice when people started investing in his life, and when he started to invest in other people's lives, he started to notice that things got better. So maybe you're a lot like Kyle, and sometimes you feel like your life isn't really going where you want it to be. Maybe assets is a place to look. Take a look at what kinds of things you can work on, maybe what kinds of things you're deficient in. Some of you who feel like life is going pretty good, take a look. I bet you got a lot of assets. Assets will be something we're going to be taking a look at. How do we build them in our lives, and how do we gain more of them throughout a lifetime?